What if I told you that almost all of the political unrest we've seen in America over the last 15 years has been caused by just one historical event? This graph shows the total outside spending in American election cycles from 1990 through to 2024. Note the rise and fall pattern between presidential terms and the actual full-scale presidential elections that take place every 4 years. The data shown here denotes outside spending, which means that these dollars do not go directly into the campaign funds of individual politicians or parties. Almost all of this spending was in the form of independent expenditures by corporations. Now, I want you to focus in on the year 2010. This was a midterm, partway through President Obama's first term as president. Looking back from that time, we can see that corporate spending connected to electioneering was growing, but very, very slowly. But after 2010, we saw an explosion in the total amount of spending taking place. Not just an exponential doubling, but rather a tripling or quadrupling in the amount that corporations, rather than individuals, began putting money into our elections. How did this happen? In 2010, I was 11 years old and I looked like this. I loved Spider-Man and science and building things, and the issue is I didn't know anything about freaking politics at 11 years old, so it's entirely possible that I don't remember everything right because I was otherwise busy being a kid, but I swear on my life that politics didn't used to be so divisive. I mean, I grew up in Ohio, so there were racists and homophobes everywhere, but people generally kept it all to themselves. It was a polite kind of bigotry, however nonetheless disgusting it was. Some quick data from Pew Research seems to corroborate my anecdotal experience. From 1994 through to 2014, the average political values of Americans began fracturing more and more aggressively along party lines. But we could just attribute that to the rise of smartphones and social media, right? And honestly, I think that that's right, but maybe not for the reasons you'd expect. You see, it can be true that online spaces can put people into echo chambers, but beyond some edge cases, social media doesn't necessarily radicalize people on its own. Stay with me here. Today's topic is still the underlying reason for all of our problems today. Speaking of which, welcome back to the quiet part. Most of the people watching my videos aren't subscribed yet, so click to get subscribed and check out the description below the like button if you want to take a look at each of my sources for the research I did for this video. Today we are talking about the 2010 Supreme Court decision in a case called Citizens United versus the FEC. Grab a snack because this is about to turn into a very important but detailed history lesson. Corporations won't say the quiet part out loud, so let's me and you say it aloud for them. In preparation for this video, I have spent dozens of hours reading through official Supreme Court documents, watching videos, and taking notes. If you don't believe me, check out the live stream I did of me listening to the main Supreme Court opinion on this topic, while also trying to beat Subnautica. It was absolutely riveting, and it was 180 pages long. Okay, I get it. Jingle, jingle. Attention spans are short. I get it. Here's the very quick summary. In 2007, a conservative nonprofit group called Citizens United put together a hit piece on Hillary Clinton. At the time, she and Barack Obama were competing as Democrats for the office of the president. This nonprofit group wanted to publish their character assassination documentary called Hillary right before the election. And they, as a corporation, wanted to use their money to make this movie publicly available. However, up until 2010, this kind of electioneering by a corporation was legally gray. Knowing this, Citizens United appointed a lawyer and asked a federal court to prevent the FEC, or Federal Election Commission, from criminalizing them for publishing their work. This then got escalated to the Supreme Court, which overturned existing court precedent, determining that yes, it is somehow legal for corporations to spend nearly unlimited amounts of money on this kind of propaganda-based electioneering. Meaning that for the entire lifetimes of pretty much every living American past the age of 30, corporate spending on election propaganda had been illegal just until 2010. Wow, that was a lot. But unfortunately, it's actually way more complicated, and a proper discussion about all of this will require us to define a number of new and interesting words. So at least this will be good for your vocabulary, and conveniently enough, I'm actually in a reserved room at the Denver Public Library's Central Branch. I just love making use of these sorts of public resources, and if we're going to be talking about history and the meaning of words and vocabulary, there's no better place to be than a library. First up, let's talk about the original context. Citizens United is a conservative nonprofit organization that makes political propaganda in the form of commercials, advertisements, and films. They formed in the late 80s, and their current corporate president, David Bossie, has worked as a campaign manager for, drumroll, Donald Trump. So, right, their whole purpose is to make propaganda. Specifically, the kind of nonprofit that they are, a 501c4, is supposed to operate for the promotion of social welfare, again, usually through propaganda. Now, this group wasn't stupid. They knew that releasing their film like this would be illegal, which leads us into a discussion about Supreme Court precedent. The United States is divided into three co-equal branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. The Supreme Court is judicial, their job being to interpret existing laws, specifically as it pertains to the U.S. Constitution, which acts as the highest level of legislation in the country. So when a huge law is violated or challenged, it is the Supreme Court that goes through the process of interpreting the laws and passing down judgment based on them. Before 2010, there were a few prior Supreme Court cases that had ruled on this topic before. And in order to avoid saying this topic 30 times, let me teach you another interesting new word. Citizens United versus FEC is ultimately about whether or not independent expenditures during elections should be legal at the federal level. In essence, an independent expenditure is money used by a union, nonprofit, or corporation that does not go straight into a particular politician's campaign or political party or campaign fund. And in this context, independent expenditures usually get used for advertising and what I will be calling propaganda. Citizens United first asked a federal court for an injunction or court order to prevent the Federal Election Commission from criminalizing them. The Supreme Court stepped in when it became clear that this case was really about whether independent expenditures should be legal, with Citizens United arguing that this kind of spending by corporations or nonprofits was actually somehow a form of free speech per the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, which again is the Supreme Court's entire purview. In 1990, the Supreme Court ruled that it was legal for the state of Michigan to prohibit independent expenditures by corporations as they are connected to public elections. This case was called Austin versus the Michigan State Chamber of Commerce, usually just referred to as Austin by the Supreme Court justices themselves. The Michigan Chamber of Commerce was actually a kind of semi-nonprofit organization itself, and Richard Austin, the Michigan Secretary of State at the time, sought to prevent this corporation or type of nonprofit from engaging in independent expenditures with the express purpose to influence an election. It's a little complicated, but there is a way right now for businesses to legally spend money on elections, and this was the case in 1990 as well. By setting aside money into something called a political action committee, which is a thing that's entirely worth its own video, these companies are able to completely legally put money into elections. But political action committees follow a different set of regulations that have a bit more oversight than just personally using the funds of a business for anything you want and any amount of propaganda or potentially even just incorrect truths and lies through propaganda. By setting aside money in a political action committee or separate fund that follows different regulations, it can be completely legal. But this corporation wanted to use their own private money for these electioneering means. This whole situation eventually got escalated to the Supreme Court, and at the time they ruled that bans on independent expenditures by individual states are constitutional. They ruled that it was okay to say a corporation is not able to spend money individually without regulation on elections like this. Now, there is another sort of side issue connected to Citizens United versus the FEC that I am glossing over for the sake of brevity. They did not only argue that independent expenditures should be legal, they also wanted to not have to disclose their donors on their advertisements for their movie itself, which is an entire separate line of historical court precedent that I will be omitting for time's sake. I encourage you to research it yourself. In reality, this debate is about corruption. Moving forward, I may either cite the officially released Supreme Court opinion about this Supreme Court ruling, or the oral arguments between the Supreme Court and Citizens United's lawyer that took place before the final decision. Throughout the court opinion document, different transfigurations of the word corrupt or corruption make an appearance a total of 123 times. The United States is no stranger to corruption, and a long history of acts, laws, and Supreme Court cases prove this. First, in 1907, we had the Tillman Act, which outright banned corporations from directly contributing to political campaigns. Later, the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 amended something called the National Labor Relations Act, which oversaw the structure of unions. Now, the Taft-Hartley Act itself isn't something I consider particularly favorable because it restricted the rights of unions in a lot of ways, but one of the good ways was that it restricted the rights of unions and corporations to spend monies influencing elections. The underlying reasoning, unfortunately, wasn't necessarily an anti-corruption logic. It was centered on fairness, something people are afraid of called equity. The law wanted to limit the ability of unions or corporations from betraying the political goals of their members, whether they be in the majority or minority opinion of the corporation or union that is taking action. So the idea was to make it so you weren't forced to pay union dues to then have that money go to something you don't politically agree with. Later, in 1971, the Federal Elections Campaign Act placed limits on the total amount of money that could be contributed to candidates for federal office, and it also set standards for disclosing where contributions were coming from in the first place. Then this act was amended, first following Watergate, and then the outcome of another important background Supreme Court case connected to Citizens United versus the FEC. In this case, from 1976, the Supreme Court ruled in Buckley versus Vallejo that spending money for a candidate is actually a kind of protected free speech. This undid some of the limits placed previously by that 1971 Federal Elections Campaign Act. Then, most recently, we had the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, or BCRA, which Citizens United feared would be enforced upon them following their release of Hillary. This act placed a ban on the broadcast, cable, or satellite transmission of electioneering communications, if paid for by corporations immediately before an election, which I have been referring to thus far almost exclusively as propaganda, because that is fundamentally what this is. Electioneering communications by a corporation, whether it be through a political action committee or through their own private funds, it's propaganda, and we all know it. After all this history, starting with harsh regulations on corruption, followed by repeated repeals spearheaded by conservatives, we have come upon the Supreme Court case that doomed America. The Supreme Court voted in a 5-4 decision that Citizens United should have been allowed to show their propaganda to the public, even though they were a private corporation using their private money. This established a new court precedent that would, in essence, make it legal for corporations and businesses to spend nearly unlimited amounts of money on designing, delivering, and displaying political propaganda targeted at federal elections in the United States. Have you ever seen this little goober before? This guy is Elon Musk. Oh, I wonder what that was about. Well, this guy is apparently pretty wealthy. He oversees a few different corporations, Tesla, SpaceX, and Twitter, to name a few. In the official Supreme Court opinion, the majority justices supporting the decision to allow corporate money into politics said that the appearance of influence or access, furthermore, will not cause the electorate to lose faith in our democracy. And what they meant is that moving forward on Citizens United versus FEC, ruling that businesses should be allowed to play a significant, unbelievable role in our elections and politics, they felt that everything would be okay. That people wouldn't lose faith in democracy, even though a multi-billion-dollar corporation was now able to effectively use more free speech than any one individual's vote could ever represent. That's great for them, right? The Supreme Court justices that agreed and tried to say that people would be okay with it, I love their optimism, but they were beyond short-sighted. Although, in the minority or dissenting group, there were glints of intelligence and reasonable precognition. Justice John Paul Stevens said this in his dissent. In addition to this immediate drowning out of non-corporate voices, there may be deleterious effects that follow soon thereafter. Corporate domination of electioneering can generate the impression that corporations dominate our democracy. When citizens turn on their televisions and radios before an election and hear only corporate electioneering, they may lose faith in their capacity as citizens to influence public policy. A government captured by corporate interests, they may come to believe, will be neither responsive to their needs nor willing to give their views a fair hearing. The predictable result is cynicism and disenchantment, an increased perception that large spenders call the tune, and a reduced willingness of voters to take part in democratic governance. He predicted the outcome of this decision that you and I have had to suffer through with terrifying accuracy. He predicted an American political landscape filled with the domination of electioneering by corporations. He placed himself in the shoes of young people today, sitting down to see propaganda thrown at them by corporations left and right. He predicted that an imbalance of power would lead people to lose faith in their capacity as citizens to influence public policy. And even worse, he predicted the resulting cynicism and disenchantment this would cause among young people of the future. Just recently, I was going about my day when someone mentioned Elon Musk and Wisconsin in the same sentence, which struck me as unusual because recently he's been doing a lot of fascism at the federal level of the United States government. But this time, he was messing around with the state, specifically the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. Elon was seen handing out $1 million checks to voters as part of a quote-unquote giveaway. Now, Elon does most of his corruption through political action committees, as opposed to independent expenditures. But check this out. His PAC of choice, America PAC, released this video. On the left is the original of this person from earlier explaining how she got her check.
My name's Ekaterina Diesler. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I did exactly what Elon Musk told everyone to do. Sign a petition, refer friends and family, vote, and now I have $1 million.
On the right is the edited version, following the PAC's realization that they let her explicitly say that she was, in essence, compensated for voting.
My name's Ekaterina Diesler. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I did exactly what Elon Musk told everyone to do. Sign a petition, refer friends and family, and now I have $1 million.
I am so fucking tired of dystopia. Like, you don't get it. This guy, Justice Stevens, he knew this was coming. He was a Republican, and he still didn't want this. How am I not supposed to feel powerless and disenchanted and practically betrayed by all political institutions altogether? What is even left of America? Whatever myth that it ever was. You don't get how badly I want to just lie down and give up like every other doomer. But were that the case, I probably wouldn't be making this video. Let's all say it together. The United States has become a corporate oligarchy. There's no way of reframing or restating it. It's as simple as that, albeit with a clearly well understood now complicated cause. And it all came down to this one stupid, awful Supreme Court decision and what it represents. And the worst part is that in the original Supreme Court opinion document and the oral arguments, the justices spent half their time debating whether or not free speech focuses more on what's being said or whether the origin of that speech is an actual living, breathing person. They were debating whether or not a corporation is equivalent to a human being. The majority opinion went on and on about how, in effect, a corporation is a kind of person. In 2025, corporations have more rights than trans people because at least they haven't been federally written out of existence. So what do? I've said the quiet part out loud, but what difference does it make? Well, that, my friends, will all be up to you. If, after all this, you're still a fan of so-called law and order that will abandon your humanity in favor of corporate welfare at the drop of a hat, then use what few rights you still have and come out and protest peacefully. Make your voice heard, make signs, make an effort, make friends, use your wallet, boycott if you will, help us work towards a real general strike. But if you're more like me, then just doing what you're allowed to might not seem to be enough. Am I actively making a call, compelling people to break the law as part of protest? Well, that is an entire other discussion going back to MLK and the Black Panthers. I encourage you to make your own decision on that front. The riot is the voice of the unheard. Make of that what you will. What I am calling you to do is to learn. Learn about alternative systems of governance. Learn how to grow a garden. Learn how to repair your own clothes and car. Learn how to get your own needs met. And learn how to organize within your own community. I am encouraging people to vote, but with all this disenchantment, I'd be pretty inconsiderate to turn voting into yet another moralized purity politics kind of issue. I'm saying that maybe there's still a chance we can fix things through our existing systems, but I personally wouldn't bet on it. I am calling you to question, at what point does following the law stop working? At what point does relying on a system that can make a mistake as big as this stop making sense? I'm asking you to rethink what you once thought about America. I'm trying to say that even if America is doomed, you don't have to be. We can be all right, despite these failing institutions, despite the bold-faced corruption, despite the subversion of what once seemed like democracy. In the face of entropy itself, we can figure things out. But not if we don't first understand how things have gone wrong in the first place. If you need somewhere to point your finger in frustration, point at Citizens United versus the FEC. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, get subscribed, and share this video with others. Leave a comment below and join our community Discord if you want to keep the conversation going. The link is right down there in the description. Check out one of these videos YouTube has recommended. They're probably pretty good. Take care and have the best day that you can. And once again, thank you for watching. Goodbye.